Hi everybody, Raison here. I'm coming at you with the 4th edition of Match Memories. You might notice I've got a fleece on. Weather's turned in the south a little bit. Rain. Not too cold. 6-7 degrees at night, and it's probably about 12-14 degrees out there now. A little bit cold in my tack room. Not had the heating on today. Been head down doing hooks, and that's why there's hook boxes and rigs and everything behind me, just all shoved to the back so I can crack on with these match memory videos that I'm really enjoying. And while we're on the subject of that, I'd just like to take a minute just to thank everybody for their messages and comments on the videos that I'm doing. I really am enjoying doing them, and I'm glad that you seem to be enjoying the storylines behind it, a little bit of backstage access, if you like. But like I said on the previous one, I'm going to do the 2008 World Championships that was on the Spinadesco Canal in Italy. Fantastic venue at the time. The Italians had a lot of their big matches on this canal. It was quite wide, a little bit like, for those of you that have fished the Gloucester Canal, quite an industrial sort of setting on the far bank. I remember there was a big concrete factory and various other big buildings opposite. Quite steep concrete banks going into the canal, and you had a ledge going down, concrete ledge, and then the normal bottom would come and it would just go off out. It didn't seem to get bottomless in the middle, and there were never actually massive boats going up and down. But it was used by reasonable sized boats. Quite a soft bottom, as we found out during the practice sessions. There were areas that were quite soft, very silty. And when you're faced with fish like carp, carasio, which is basically the same fish as RF1s, skimmers, there was a fish in there called an asp. For those of you that don't know, it's a chub-like fish, quite a predatory fish. Preys on the small fish, and if you're ever abroad and you see fish striking, especially in mainland Europe, the good chance are that they're an asp. But they did actually play a part on this actual match, so that did definitely come into it. So like I say, 2008 in Spinadesco on the canal. Again, we've gone for 2 weeks. Teams roughly the same. By this time, Sean and obviously Stuart had well established themselves in the setup, doing well. And you've got to remember, we're going into this event coming off the back of a string of a lot of good results. Obviously, Alan had won it individually the year before, if my memory serves me right, in Hungary on Lake Valence. The year before that, we'd obviously won the World Championships in I think Portugal. So, you know, like, we were the team to beat. Obviously, Des had come into the fray by now. It was only a matter of time before Des actually got in on the England team front. You know, he's just a fantastic angler and forced his way in, and obviously been in ever since. It was a venue that was going to suit anglers like Des, Stevie, myself, you know, and all the team really. You know, like, you've got, like I've just mentioned, half the team there, but you've got myself and Stevie travelling together. You've got Sean and Des travelling together, and they're still travelling together to this day. They've you know, formed a formidable duo, so to speak. So it just goes to show that, you know, travelling companions are very important, and the longer you can keep those travelling companions, the better your relationship, and the more you talk about fishing, and so on and so on and so on. And then obviously you had Alan and Stu travelling together again. By this time, Stu had well established himself in the team, and I think at this stage, might have been a year before, but Stu was actually ranked #1. They do this ranking system, FIPS or SIPS or the governing body, and they do it for Europeans and for World Championships, and it's done over the last 5 years, and Stu was actually ranked #1 at one time. So fair play there. There's not many English anglers that have been ranked #1, and it's no mean feat, 100%. But again, we went for 2 weeks. I remember the trip started off not the best. we had the hotel booked, and on arrival at the hotel, it was a tiny, tiny little, if you can imagine, it was almost like the Munsters house, you know. It was a tiny little staircase and little tiny rooms, nowhere outside to keep the bait, nowhere to do any gear outside. The car had to be kept on the main street by the square, and it was like a 200, you know, just totally no good for what we actually needed. And Stevie was adamant that we were booked in to the official hotel, but apparently we weren't. So I remember that we spent one night there, I think, and we just said to, you know, even if we've got to drive 30, 40 mile every morning, we need somewhere that's more efficient for us. We need somewhere to keep the bait, the ground bait. And bearing in mind, when you're in Italy, you know, live bait's readily available, but your ground bait and everything, you get it at the beginning of the week, and that's yours for the week. So you can imagine sometimes you've got 30, 40, 50, 60 boxes of census ground bait, and you need somewhere to put it. And the feeling of being organised is very, very important. And I remember I think it was the next morning, me and Stevie jumped in Stevie's van then, and we actually drove to the official hotel and said, look, is there any way you could squeeze us in? And I remember me and Stevie stood at the desk, and this lady's gone down the board. She said, well, you should be here anyway, you're booked in already. So of course, in about 10 seconds we were back in the van, got our stuff packed, and in the official hotel. And what a difference that made. Nice big rooms, balcony, massive garage underneath that was just literally designated to the teams that were staying there. They're very respectful, all these teams. You know, we've never had any problems with stuff being taken or anything. Everyone respects everyone, and we each had our little corner of the garage, and it was just fantastic. A massive car park outside, exactly what you want. And it's so important when you go away from home for a couple of weeks that you're nice and settled in a nice environment, and you've got plenty of room. Going on to the, excuse me, just had gone back to the normal coffee now, so I've run out of the tins of coffee. Going on to the venue, when we actually arrived at the venue, it did have that sort of industrial feel to it. You drive down a typical Italian little windy road into this bit of a village, and then there's some factories. And I remember the first time we looked off this bridge, there was a bit of an oil slick over the canal, and it's like, blimey, you sure we're in Italy? I thought there'd be like birds singing and gondolas up and down, and, you know, ice cream stands, and it was none of that. The actual far bank, when we looked at it, which is the match bank, however, was slightly different. There was nice trees, and there was a big banking along the back of the pegs, about 15 metres behind the pegs. This banking went up, perfect for crowds. And if any of you have actually been to Italy and watched any matches, it is the #1 place, in my opinion, to match fish. You know, not only are the venues always full of fish, not only is the organisation always 110%, but the people and the crowds are very, very knowledgeable. They're very respectful for the anglers, not just, you know, wanting to talk to you and have time with you, but keeping quiet when you're actually fishing, and, you know, just very, very respectful and very knowledgeable anglers, most of the crowd. But again, I'll go on to that when we actually get to the weekend of the matches. So we're there for 2 weeks. We've got the unofficial practice week, then the official week, and then obviously the 2 matches at the weekend. And the unofficial week, it's a massive long canal. You've got to be 500 metres from the match length, and we ended up finding 2 or 3 little places where we could fish. And we wanted to fish different areas. But it became apparent, again, a little bit like the River Seine, things that we found out during practice on that unofficial week played a massive part on the official week's practice and what we were doing in the match. It really, really did. And as on the River Seine, it was chop worm in soil, big Bertha just sitting there ligging on, and you get bites where no one else was getting bites. What we found here, and again, I'm sure it was Stevie, one evening we were fishing and he started throwing maggots literally off the end of his keep net. And you've got to imagine there, it's a concrete slope to about probably a top 6. And we're fishing, Stevie was fishing like a top 4 off the end of his keep net. and we're hooking carp and these big asp, odd big bream, and it was like, hang on a minute, you know, like you don't know. And one of my friends who worked for Daiwa, Italy, had actually told me a little bit of information. I'm not going to tell you who it was, just in case there's any of the Italians watching, because he was quite well involved with the Italian setup. But he actually said to me that the big fish do come close. When you're practicing, when he's been there pleasure fishing, he's thrown his bait in after, it's very much like we would do on commercials here. All of a sudden you turn around and there's tail patterns, there's swirl, there's bow waving off. And he said just have a go. And it's something that we did in practice on the unofficial week. There's no eyes about. We can virtually lose ourselves on a bit of the canal, go there and fish. But again, it's that thing in your mind, well, we just sat here pleasure fishing. It's not going to work in the World Championships when there's 4, 5, 6,000 people on the bank and you're 10 metres apart. But would it? That was the question. And if it did, obviously it could be a major, major advantage for us. Now this canal's 40, 45 metres wide. You could easily fish a waggler across, but the problem with this particular canal, there was lots of drift. There was obviously locks in areas, and 1 minute the canal's pulling to the left, the next minute it's pulling to the right, and it also had quite a nasty wind on it at times, and it created this skim. And the only place you could get odd bites on a waggler was right across, and it made it virtually impossible. And I do think come the match day, there wasn't hardly a fish caught on a waggler. But what happened during that unofficial practice week was interesting, because again we fished and more and more and more fish just came into our pegs. These big carasio, carp, like I say, these asps, a lot of skimmers like between 6 and 10 ounces, and some bream between 2 and 4 pound mixed in. And it became quite apparent, a little bit different to maybe Paris, because there's more, but you needed to catch some of these bigger fish, some carasio, some carp, some bream, you know, and we were thinking like 15 to 20 pounds going to be a good weight, you know, in kilos like 6 to 9 kilos, that sort of weight. The unofficial week obviously came and went. We caught loads of fish. We got in tune with our hooks, rigs, line. I personally was using blue hydro elastic on this venue. I've got various different hydros set up, and through the course of the unofficial week, and that's the reason that we go. You know, we go to, so that when we go to the official practice week, we're on the ball, our gear's right, we can concentrate just on the feeding and the areas of the canal that could be different. I was using blue hydro, like I said, 016 mainline, 012, 013 hook lengths. Back then, it would have been match winner mainline, probably Drennan double strength, 012, 8, 011, 7 hook lengths. Hooks wise, again, you had obviously skimmer rigs where we were using 6110s. But I remember we had a little bit of problem in practice with them coming off, and I used the Gamma Powers. I got them in barbed versions in a size 20. I'm only fishing double maggot. Feeding wise, again in practice we found out that balling it was a must. They came to noise, these fish, but you didn't necessarily want to fish where you balled it. But that's another thing I'll come to. I'll talk about the approach that we actually came up with after the official practice week. So like I say, we're really happy going into the official practice week. I remember Saturday and Sunday, me and Stevie didn't fish. We'd been there all week. Really wanted to you know, make sure we're on top of our gear, our hooks, our line, all the elastics we knew. And what you've got to remember at this point in Italy, it's very, very hot. You know, and the concrete banks, it's quite a harsh environment, and it really took it out of you being on the bank all day. So the last thing you wanted to do when you did actually get back to the hotel and you had the chance to have a shower, go for a meal, a couple of drinks maybe in a chat, was to think to yourself, blimey, I've got to go and do a load of rigs. So me and Steve really got on top of our rigs on that weekend. We had a good feeling what floats and that we wanted to use. And at the time, Stevie was using a float called a Milo Ox, and it, over the next few years for that style of fishing, it was a line through the body float, Absolutely fantastic. If you bear with me one sec, I might even have some here in my tackle room. I haven't got some, I've got a load. And you can see there, beautiful float. Try and get it in focus for you. And that would have been about the size we used, a gram. You can see there the body slides on, so the line goes through the body. And it was a nice float because using that body you could actually hold it when it went to the right. Just hold the float and the canal would stop, and then it would go to the left and you could use it just to hold on. Fantastic float, but also a lot of these fish in this canal were very hard fighting. And you did get snapped an odd time, you foul hooked an odd fish, and those floats are indestructible. Still a float I use now when I'm faced with that sort of situation. So going into the official week, I can remember on the first day we went there and it was a case of let's just see what we can catch. I think we caught up to about 8 or 9 kilos the first day. I think I had 6 kilos. I had one decent carp. But nobody caught a lot around us, and we're thinking, hang on a minute, you know, what we learnt last week is really paying off. And after the first day, what I decided to do was to ball it short, ball it at 12 metres, and then just pot little tiny balls of sticky mag over the top. And I was catching odd fish that would come into this ground bait, but I was picking them off the outskirts. Sometimes, letting it go to the right, away. And those of you that have fished for Carasio in the past will know that they want to be close to bait, but not on it. And we also had some rigs on a top 6 with the same depth where you could swing out miles past your bait and you'd catch an odd Carasio and an odd carp. And that was a rig that actually came into play for me on the second day of the World Championships. But again, I'll talk more in detail about that when we arrive at the weekend. I think it was about the Wednesday on the official practice week that things really started to click for me personally. You might have heard me mention earlier in this that there was a concrete factory opposite, and we drew close to that and we were told it's a good area, there's more carp, less other fish. And I caught about 14-15 kilos in the 3 hours. Some big carp, and it really clicked. You know, once you start catching fish in that sort of environment where there's a massive hum behind you and everybody's on, you know, right on the ball, and you're catching, you know, quite a few more fish on a particular day, the confidence levels go up. And once that happens, you can be very, very hard to beat on a venue that's very regular. The same depth, you know, there's no points, there's no bays, there's no deep bits, there's no shallow bits. It's all the same. Every single peg was the same. I think there was one little bit where we found was a bit shallower, but this was even better than the normal bits. You get a lot of fish blowing in your peg. Now that takes me right back to the early stages of my fishing at Willow Park, my match fishing, where we used to fish for tench a lot with bloodworm and joker, and used to get them fizzing, and it was all about the amounts you fed and where you fished in your peg, reference to where you put your bait, and this became very important. Now I want to mention at this time that, you know, we were very cute as a team, and the management, the 2 marks, we were very cute at keeping things under our hat, and we always have been. There's only once that we've given something away and it's actually cost us, and that was a few years later, the next year, funnily enough, in Holland. But again, that's for another day. So this short line, we were really like, you know, we don't want to do it. And it was a case of Mark, or one of the Marks, either Mark Addy or Mark Down, saying to one person, right, just throw a few maggots there and see. Every time we did it, we hooked something big. And some of the areas, you know, like I remember one day I caught 3 or 4 kilos, so it can be difficult in areas in practice. But as the week went on, every peg had more bait. And again, if you remember what I said in the unofficial week, what happened, the fish just converge on an area. And it was obvious by the Thursday, Friday, that there was a lot of fish on the match length. You know, you're not going to need 30, 40 pound to do well. You're going to need probably 15, 20 pound, exactly what we said. But there was a lot of quality fish, 3 or 4 different species, like I said, to go at, and really we had 2 lines. Come the Friday night, the attack that we went with was to ball it at 12.5 metres. Then you put your dolly butt on, and we were feeding a little ball of soil with some bloodworm in. You could feed bloodworm at the time. A tiny bit of joker. There was some real tiny nuisance fish, and if you fed too much joker, you could have problems with them. So the case was to literally take the dolly butt off your pole, ball it in on the end of your pole, put your dolly butt on, drop a little ball of soil and a little ball of sticky mag in over the top, and then you top up after every fish, or feel your way into it. You know, if you topped up, caught one immediately, you might go out there and just wait a little bit. Also, by this time, it had become apparent that loose feeding with a catapult over that long line, because of the heat, you've got to remember it's like 30, anything up to like 38 degrees at times. It really was a very hot environment to be in. And like I say, the concrete made it worse for the anglers. There was a little bit of shade behind you, but nothing to, you know, nothing to offer you too much protection. So loose feeding was really good. I'm not sure who came up with that. Forgive me, whoever it was, but I remember someone doing it in practice, and it just seems to keep fish in your swim. You know, you get a few go a bit too far, but that doesn't matter. Some on your bait, and the fish are up in the water where it's very hot, and they're going down to the bottom. It just kept fish in your peg, and we loose fed on both days on that long line. Now, going back to the short line, obviously that had worked, and it's something that we've managed to keep very, very quiet. And it was a good job, really, when I think back to it. So the Saturday comes. Unfortunately, Stu didn't make the team. So the team is myself, Stevie, Des and Sean and Alan. I can't quite remember what everybody else did. I've looked through all the notes again. My father hasn't let us down. I've got a scrapbook here, absolutely full. I've even got the official final classification from Phipps. It's just fantastic to look through it. But again, I can't remember where everybody drew. But I do remember the first day, obviously, what happened with my own draw. I was faced with being right outside that concrete factory, which again, fantastic draw. There were lots of good areas, end pegs, gaps, and this, that, and the other. But there was probably 10 or 12 pegs out opposite this concrete factory that had been slightly better in practice. Now, what quite often happens to me in a lot of these big matches is I tend to, wherever I go, I draw next to the guy that no one wants to draw next to. It's happened to me all the way along my career, not just internationally, but domestically as well. You know, I remember going on a final on the River Goodon, drew next to John Allerton. Brilliant. You know, go to a bleak venue, I draw next to Descay. Go to, and right up to the modern day, go to Partridge, draw next to Andy Bennett. Brilliant. 150 peg match. What's the odds on that? And the pressure can really stack on you. So you can imagine I'm getting my gear out. First day of the World Champs. Everything's good. Luigi Sorti comes down next to me. The Italian that lives local. Or I think he lives local. But he certainly fishes the venue a lot. As did all the Italians. Great. You know, now I've really got my work cut out. A massive crowd assembled behind us. One of the best fishing crowds I've ever been, or I've ever had the pleasure to fish in front of, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. You know, I've been fishing in certain countries where the crowd, you'll be next to one of their anglers, they catch a fish, they clap, you catch a fish, and no one makes a sound. But the difference is in Italy, you know, Luigi would catch a fish, I'd catch a fish, and everyone would just clap, and it was like fantastic. Now, I had a slightly different match to the fact that I was catching odd fish on the long pole. I caught a nice carp early on, about £4, and it was very close between me and the Italian on my left. But all match, I'm loose feeding maggots short, and I can see him looking at me every time I threw maggots. Bearing in mind you're only 10, 12 metres apart, and he's like, what are you doing that for? You know, like, don't, you know, and again, cut a long story short, because I want to keep this in one so that I can send it out. If it's over X amount of time, I struggle to really send it on the files and that I've got. But to cut a long story short, we finished the match, and I had 13 kilos, I believe, and I think the Italian angler had about 10. I won the section. I think he was 5th or 6th, and the feeling was just like unbelievable. Now, he speaks very good English now, and I've been next to him since, again in Holland and in Belgium on a canal out there in the Europeans. And I can remember it might have been him or his runner who spoke, and he's like, "Why did you lose feed short?" And I dropped it in there with half hour to go and thought, right, you think I've been catching a few out there, you watch this. And I never had a bite. And I can remember the Italian crowd and that, "Why were you throwing maggots short?" You know, like, and I'm like, to be honest, I don't know, it's just a waste of time, you know. But it wasn't until I got back to the rest of the team. Now, Alan had a big bream short. Stevie had caught a couple of big fish short. I think Sean had a big carp short. I think, basically, I was the only one in the team that didn't catch short. But after the first day, I'd obviously won my section. Stevie was 3rd, Sean was 8th, Des, I think, was 2nd, and I think Alan was 8th. So we totaled 22 points. And if it wasn't for that short line, you know, I remember we caught some very big and very, very important fish on that top 4, right in front of us where we were throwing maggots. And that is what made the difference, not only on the first day, but on the overall, over the 2 days. Because I'm now going to tell you about the second day. So you can imagine, it's all gone round that obviously England have caught some fish short. So you can imagine that short line on day 2. Everybody is just lashing bait in there. And there's none of this gently like us, oh, after an hour we'll just start throwing 30 or 40 maggots there. There were balls of ground bait, balls of sticky mag, tins of corn being emptied straight out the tin. And it was just a write-off. And I think Stevie might have caught on it the second day, but I'm not sure. But I know it was a complete different kettle of fish, excuse the pun, for us the second day as far as that short line. But we managed to do okay. Personally, I drew 2nd to end peg in B, or I think I was in D section. Drew 2nd to end peg, and it was an area with these trees a bit closer to you, which offered you a bit of shade. Really nice. Again, a massive crowd assembled. I was quite pleased that I didn't have, no disrespect to the guys that I was next to, but I didn't have one of the Italians next to me again, because it does heap on a little bit of extra pressure. So again, I loose fed short, as we do, carried on fishing the long line as normal. And I had a nice start. I caught some skimmers, I caught some Carasio. But going back to the beginning of this video, I mentioned a rig that we had. Most of the rigs were on a top 4, but we had rigs on like a top 5, the same depth as the canal didn't deepen off, and you could swing it out past your bait. Now, again, I've forged a very good friendship with John Desk, who was actually there on the bank this day. He wasn't fishing. And with about an hour to go of the second day, I was catching quite well, just odd fish, and Mark Downs and everyone were up offering brilliant advice. And out of this massive crowd behind me, I just heard this voice that I recognised, and it was John Desk. And he said, I'm not going to do a silly French accent now, by the way, but he said, "William, I think you should try your rig to go past your bait." And I thought, yeah, you know, like, yeah, you know, like, and I'm not just saying this, but I was thinking of it anyway. But when this voice that I knew came out of the crowd, I've got so much respect for, and he just got a wealth of experience. Put that down, picked my rig up, a white and a red maggot, swung it out, and it literally settled, went down, went straight under, and I caught a 3-pound Carasio. I caught a 1.5 pound skimmer on that, and then with 20 minutes to go, I came back in closer to my bait, cupped in a little ball of sticky mag, and I caught another carp about 1.5 pounds. The second day, I actually weighed in 10 kilos, which was good enough for 2nd in my section. Didn't really know it at the time, the individual side, but word had come down the bank that we'd struggled. We got 2 or 3 good results, but we got a couple of real bad results. Des had drawn in a real bad area. I think Alan had drawn in a not so good area. But it transpired that myself, Stevie and Sean were all 2nd. Des ended up 29th. These are massive sections, 35, 40 people, and Alan was 18th. So we totaled, I think, 50 odd points on the second day. But to our sort of relief, it was still enough to hang on and win. San Marino hadn't quite clawed back. We ended up with 75 points, San Marino 104, Italy 109. But for myself, I can remember I was sat on my box, and what a lot of people don't know is that out of all the world championships I've fished, 2 or 3 as a junior and now X amount as a senior, but there's only one that my father didn't make due to ill health and an operation that he had to have, and that was Italy. It was the only one. The one that I won was the only one that he never came on, and that's my biggest disappointment. It was my best achievement ever in fishing, but the biggest disappointment also in fishing was my father wasn't there. And I can remember, who was it now handed me a phone? Literally, I'd weighed in. Nobody knew about the individuals or anything. And I sat down on my box, and somebody handed my phone and said, "There's someone wants to talk to you," and it was my dad. And my dad's like, I think he was, I'm sure my dad was still in hospital then. He was still in hospital. And it was my dad on the phone. And I can remember, I don't really cry, but the feeling was, and as I was on the phone to my dad's like, "What's happened? Has the team won it? How have you done?" And I said, "I think we've held on." I said, "But San Marino have done really well." And then I felt a hand on my shoulder, and it was Mark Downs. And he's gone, "Well done, champ, you've won it." And I'm like, "Hang on a minute, Dad. What did you just say?" And there's a good picture in one of the magazines of Mark Downs. And somebody's actually caught it perfectly on camera of Mark, the moment that Mark sort of leant over and said to me, you can see it there. Sorry about this, because I just want to get it dead right. But that actual picture there is when Mark Downs is telling me that I've won the World Championships. And of course then, I'm the kind of person, kind of angler, that until it's set in stone, I'm like, wow, and I've gone back on the phone, I said, Mark Downs has just told me I've won it. And my dad's like, I knew you would, blah, blah, blah. And it was just fantastic. But, I've got some real fantastic clips here. And one of the nicest ones for me, obviously a picture of myself there, going for gold. It's called, I'll try and get it in the right light. I'm sorry about my videoing skills. But I've got so much good memorabilia there. Brilliant, brilliant result. Now, obviously, we won it as a team. I won it individually. Stevie's third overall. So for me to get up on the podium with, one of my, one of the people that I admire most in angling, and that's helped me and taught me more than, probably, apart from my father, he's probably taught me as much about fishing as anyone. He's been so unlucky not to win it himself, but I think the consistency of Stevie sort of speaks for itself. Winning it as a team, absolutely fantastic. I remember that night we went to a castle for a massive presentation, as they do in Italy. Nothing's done by half. Brilliant, brilliant time. I definitely got a little bit too drunk, because I remember going out of the castle to try and find the toilets, and it took me about an hour and a half to find my way back in. But that wasn't my fault. I remember someone giving me this little blue shot, some kind of exotic, probably some kind of exotic European liqueur type thing, and I never felt right after that, coupled with quite a few beers, and it was a fantastic, fantastic night, and what an achievement. Also, for me to come back home, and I remember I took the World Championships trophy into the hospital and put it on my dad's sideboard, which really is, the most memorable thing. Brilliant trip. The only regret out of it all is obviously my father couldn't make it, but he was over the moon, and just such an achievement, not only for the team, but for myself individually. I'm not too sure what I'm going to do next. I'm definitely, through popular demand, going to do my slider one. But I will be letting you know as and when and what I'm going to do for my 5th in the series of Match Memories. But until then, look after yourself, keep preparing your gear, and looking forward to when we can get out on the bank soon, because I'm sure it's not going to be long. Take care, bye bye.